Welcome to the Penn State Wrestling Show. If that caught you off guard, it did us as well.
Yeah.
We use a program called StreamYard. Lots of people use a program called StreamYard for doing these shows and these broadcasts. And there was an update today after, of course, after we went live this morning, if you're watching on Wednesday. And apparently they changed the intro music on the generic countdown clock, which is definitely not the vibe for a Penn State wrestling show that I was expecting. So, Greg, welcome to the show. A lot of new stuff here today as we talk about the wrestling team getting ready for the Big Ten tournament.
Yes, the intro caught me off guard, but the Big Ten pre-seeds, which came out on Wednesday ahead of this weekend's Big Ten tournament, did not. Things mostly as expected for Penn State, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But yes, the postseason is here. It doesn't feel like it was all that long ago that we were talking about the dual meets in November to start the 2024-2025 season. Now Penn State's, of course, the Big Ten regular season champ, heads to Evanston this weekend to try and become the latest Big Ten tournament champ out at Northwestern. So big weekend ahead for Penn State as they ramp up toward the national tournament, which is now 2 weeks away in Philadelphia.
So we're going to get into all of those seedings that came out today here. That's the bulk of today's show, and then a couple of other news and notes here at the end. So do you want to get into a high-level thought about what it is, or do you want to just get into, let's go through 1 to 10 and talk about the different weight classes?
Yeah, we'll go through the weights here in just a second, but I would say there's a couple big takeaways. The first one being that Gabe Arnold is going to wrestle for Iowa at 184 pounds. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the show, but there was, of course, a question whether it would be him or Angelo Ferrari for the Hawkeyes. It is Gabe Arnold for Tom Brands' team, so that decision has been made. It sounded like that was the expectation going into the week, so no great surprise, but it's certainly worth noting, something people were looking for when these seeds came out. Penn State goes to the Big Ten tournament with 5 number 1 seeds. All 10 starters are ranked inside the top 4 at their respective weight classes, and yeah, it's going to be a very interesting tournament. There's some pretty interesting semifinal potential, both for Penn State and for other teams across the Big Ten, and obviously final potential as well.
Yeah. And of course, Greg's going to be following it all weekend long, BWIillustrated.com, and social media, everywhere else you might go to check out what Greg has to do. By the way, follow us on social media. Like our Twitter handles are at the bottom of our pictures here. So make sure you follow us for Greg, especially when it comes to the wrestling side of things. So Luke Littledahl, a quick ascent to top 10 during the regular season, now tops out number 4 in the seeding for the tournament. What do you read into his seeding here and his prospect for a championship later this weekend?
Yeah, so there's 2 main takeaways here for Luke Littledahl at 125 pounds. The first is that by being the 4 seed, it means the only 2 wrestlers who found a way to beat him this year are on the other side of the bracket from him. Well, we all remember, of course, Brendan McCrone pinned him at when they wrestled. Penn State wrestled Ohio State, and then Dean Peterson of Rutgers beat Littledahl 4-1. Both of those guys are on the other side of the bracket from Littledahl. But what does that mean? Of course, it means he's on the side of top seed Matt Ramos of Purdue, who has among the country's most technical falls. He's not the leader in that category because Mitchell Messenbrink is, the Penn State 165-pounder, who we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, that's who Littledahl will have to go through in the semifinals, assuming both make it there, if he is going to have a chance to win a Big Ten title in his first season as a starter at Penn State. So yeah, that's the big takeaway based on being number 4. He is on the other side of the 2 guys who beat him this year, but that also means he's on the side of the number 1 guy in the country. So we'll do some predictions over at BWIillustrated.com later this week. Right now, I'm hard-pressed to pick Littledahl to beat Matt Ramos of Purdue, assuming those 2 would meet in the semifinal on the top half of the bracket, but we're reacting in real time, so we'll see if that changes. After my scoring incident, if you remember a few shows back, I was trying to predict the match score, and I kind of had to make it work then on the back end. So I'm not going to make the prediction live, but I will say
I thought you did okay. I thought you did okay.
We got in the ballpark. My current inclination, though, would not be to pick Luke Littledahl to win that match, but when you pick against Lightning Luke, that can always be at your own peril. So good fine draw for him, and obviously, again, good tests coming for him and the rest of the Penn State wrestlers at Big Tens to get ready for NCAAs.
If there's been a guy just getting some feedback from Penn State wrestling fans that people are not super pleased with just generally, and I think the injuries are part of the conversation. Braeden Davis at 133, number 4 again in the seeding here. Do you think he has an opportunity to do better than that in the tournament? And how does this break out for him?
Yeah, the question for him will just be, is everything where Penn State wants it to be with him from a health perspective? Of course, if they didn't feel like he was able to go compete at the Big Ten tournament, or move on in the postseason, they will not have put him in this event. So that tells you, of course, that part of things. But where is he at from a health perspective? Is there any reason to think that he won't be able to compete at the level we've known him to be able to compete at when healthy? I don't think there is, but I just based on how this season has played out, it just doesn't feel like something you can rule out. He hasn't wrestled since February 16 when he lost to Lucas Bird in the Illinois dual meet. Of course, he beat Nick Bouzakis of Ohio State back on February 14th, and then didn't wrestle against Americans. So in and out of the lineup for him at times this season.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that week off between Penn State's last match and typically when we get into Big Tens always feels longer than it is. But yeah. So Braeden Davis checks in at the 4 seed in this weight class, 133 pounds. Top seed Drake Ayala of Iowa is the wrestler he would have to go through if the seeds hold to make the finals. Lucas Bird, who we just mentioned a second ago, is the 2 seed. Braxton Brown, the 3 seed, down on the other side of the bracket. So with Davis, it just becomes a question of again, does he feel like he is he not does he feel like, but is he where he needs to be in this ascension to top form for the national tournament, which of course starts at Big Tens. So that'll be the question, and we might get an answer before that, T. Frank, but I'm more than willing to bet that we don't get one until the action gets underway on Saturday.
Right. So after that, it's pretty much a straight run. So I'm just going to let you go for the next couple of wrestlers here and say what you want about Bo Bartlett, Shayne Van Ness, Tyler Kasich, Messbrink. I mean, it's just after those first two, it's 1-1-2, 1-1-1, 2-2-2. Everyone is predicted to be, somewhere near the final for the next 8 wrestlers. So what do you think?
Yeah, so let's start 141. Bo Bartlett, the 1 seed. Jesse Mendez, the 2 seed. Brock Hardy then checks in at number 3 from Nebraska. Pretty much how things were expected to play out. Once Bartlett beat Mendez, so no real surprises there. The Vance Vombar of Minnesota would be the potential semifinal opponent for Bo Bartlett if the seeds end up holding. So that would be something to watch for there. He, of course, will have a first-round bye, which essentially means that after 125 and 133, Penn State fans are going to be waiting a little bit to see their Penn State wrestlers in action, simply because they will have to go through all of the first-round matchups at 141 and all the first-round matchups at 149 before Tyler Kasich would then be on the mat when they get to the first round of action at 157, because Shayne Van Ness, of course, as the 1 seed, as you noted, T. Frank, has a bye at 149. Kyle Parko of Iowa checks in at number 2, and then Ridge Lovett of Nebraska, number 3. Interestingly, Dylan D'Amelio, I guess not interesting because that's how it projected going into this week, but Dylan D'Amelio of Ohio State, who Shayne Van Ness beat during the dual meet season by decision, is the 4 seed. So again, if the seeds would hold, it would be Van Ness and D'Amelio in the semifinals on the top half of the 149-pound bracket. For the right to either face, again, if the seeds hold, Parko or Lovett from the bottom half. So very interesting to see how that plays out. Obviously, that bracket, more than maybe some others, has a pretty big impact on how seeding will go at the national tournament. So some implications there. Of course, with as many wrestlers as the Big Ten qualifies, that goes for just about every weight class. But those 3 at the top in particular will be interesting to see how everything plays out at Northwestern. And then, 157. Tyler Kasich, number 2, lost to Ethan Miller of Maryland, number 1, after he had the injury default out of that match against the Terrapin earlier this year. Has since returned to action, of course. But the question that we wrote about over at Blue White Illustrated on Sunday was whether or not the Big Ten coaches might decide to say, okay, we know that this match ended in an injury default, but we're going to award Kasich with the number 1 seed because of what the outcome could have been if the match went as long as, longer than it did. They did not decide to do that, which is of no great surprise to me, and I'm sure nobody else. They typically go off the results, however they're earned or gained. So not a really great surprise there that Miller is 1 and Tyler Kasich is 2. That puts him on the bottom, opposite Antrell Taylor of Nebraska at 157, and in a potential semifinal to seed hold. Ja'Cory Teamer of Iowa then on the number 4 seed line and on the top half of the bracket at 157. So, yeah, as you go through, you're right. Once you get past the first half, and especially the first 2 wrestlers for Penn State, not a whole lot to think about then the rest of the way, which has kind of been, how the season is, really gone in the nutshell, right?
Yeah.
You could, and you had some close matches in the upper weights. Don't get me wrong, during dual meet season, but more often than not, no matter how the first 5 weights went, if they started at the traditional 125 pounds, I think, obviously Penn State fans and anyone watching those matches had to feel pretty good about the outcome going in Penn State's favor then, based on the way the final 5 wrestle and what they've done past, present, and are expected to do in the future.
So I just want to skip ahead to this one because obviously Levi Haynes, Mitchell Mesbrink, Carter Starachi, there is a strong run there of expectation. Josh Barr, 197, but I want to get to Greg Kirkfleet at heavyweight. How excited are you, or how interesting, how exciting is Gable Stevenson and Greg Kirkfleet, that potential matchup for the Big Ten title at heavyweight?
Yeah, can't wait. I mean, look, ever since Gable decided he was coming back to wrestle one final collegiate season for the Golden Gophers, this is what everyone had their eyes set on. Remember, Greg Kirkfleet, of course, went into, the preseason and the start of the season in a situation where he was the top dog at 285. And then Gable decides to come back and, of course, goes to number 1, the spot he held in many previous college seasons at heavyweight. So, it'll be Kirkfleet's first chance to, because they didn't wrestle during the regular season, obviously. So it'll be his first chance to show where he's at against Gable. And, I just can't wait to watch that match. It's going to be fantastic. Obviously, Gable is different than the last time these 2 wrestles. Kirkfleet's different since the last time these 2 wrestled. So it will be the headliner, assuming it plays out the way we expect it to, and it's number 1 seed versus number 2 seed in the finals. The last final, if they go in traditional order at Big Tens, assuming it's those 2 in the final, it's going to be one of the most anticipated bouts of the weekend without question. And I think it'll live up to the hype. And obviously, if it plays out as planned by both wrestlers, would set them on a collision course then for the national tournament 2 weeks from now.
Yeah. So I don't want to just gloss over those other 4 wrestlers. Are there matchups you're interested in, things we can learn about 165 through 197?
Yeah, so Mitchell Messenbrink is the number 1 seed at 165. That looks like it should chalk out, and he would probably face Mikey Caliendo then in the finals. Of course, an Iowa Hawkeye who he's had success against. So you would expect the chalk to hold there. 174, Levi Haynes is the number 1 seed. Not a whole lot of unexpected listing there in terms of the seeds at 174. It's a fun bracket at the top. I know Haynes will obviously go in favored and with good reason, but there's a lot of interesting wrestlers in that bracket overall. If you're watching not just from the Penn State perspective and wanting Penn State to win as many matches as possible, that 174 bracket, especially on the consolation bracket side of things, should be pretty fun to follow. So I'm looking forward to that. Obviously, you're expecting Levi Haynes to be in the championship bracket the whole way through and reach the finals and see where things go. From there, 184, as we mentioned at the top of the show, Gabe Arnold is in for Iowa, which means if the seats hold, he would face Carter Starachi in the semifinals for a right to wrestle in the 184-pound finals. The 2 were, Gabe Arnold said everything he said about Carter Starachi and, all that good back and forth prior to the Iowa dual meet this year. That match never materialized. Angelo Ferrari wrestled for Iowa at the Bryce Jordan Center earlier this year. So those 2, if the seed hold, would meet like they were supposed to earlier this year. So that will be very fun and something to keep an eye on during the semifinals on Saturday night if everything holds. And then 197, Josh Barr is, as you note, the number 2 seed, which was expected after Stephen Buchanan of Iowa beat him during the dual meet season. Another bracket that's just kind of fun to follow. And again, I don't expect any unexpected results. I expect the chalk to pretty much hold there, but there's always surprises. And again, I think some of the backside wrestling in the consolation bracket should be pretty fun to follow throughout the tournament with an eye toward the national tournament.
All right. I know that we got a recruiting note to get out of here on. But of course, before we do that, please like the video, subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Always helps us grow this show. If you're listening on the podcast version, same thing. Subscribe where you get your podcast and leave a comment, leave a note, leave a conversation point for people to have when we're around this conversation as well. And if you're on the YouTube channel, we'd like to hear from you in the comments section. Greg, what are we getting out of here today on?
Yeah, so depending on when you're listening to this, some state wrestling championships could be either about to start or already underway. Or if you decide to listen to this Saturday morning before the Big Ten tournament starts, they will be one will be well underway and one will be somewhat in the middle of the tournament. So the Pennsylvania State Wrestling Championships start on Thursday in Hershey, Pennsylvania. There'll be 3 current Penn State connections, because obviously down the road there could be more additions to the group, but there'll be 3 Penn State connections on hand at the PWI State Wrestling Championships. 2 of them will wrestle in the Class 3A bracket. Penn State class of 2025 signee Asher Cunningham, of course, the son of Casey Cunningham, Penn State assistant coach, is the top seed at 172 pounds in Class 3A action. So he will be on the mat Thursday afternoon for his first match. Moving down to, and what I think would be, after winning at 160 last year, I think it'd be safe to say he's favored to win this year at 170 pounds as well. The other future Nittany Lion that's competing in the Class 3A tournament is Dalton Perry from Central Mountain, very accomplished high school wrestler. I'm just pulling up his record here so I have it right while we get through the rest of the show here, but Dalton Perry is in the Class 3A tournament at 145 pounds. He is the top seed there, like Asher Cunningham is. I'm sorry, I said 170. It's 172 pounds for Asher Cunningham. Dalton Perry's top seed at 145, 39-3 so far this year. He won a title as a freshman at 126 and then finished second and third the last 2 years, T. Frank. So he's looking to go out on top and get back to the champions podium at the state wrestling championships in Pennsylvania. And then Class 2A, class of 2026 commit Sam Herring will compete. He is the only current commit and or signee in the PIAA Class 2A field. He's the 2 seed at 139 pounds. So plenty of intrigue in Hershey this weekend. I'm going to try and get over there between some football stuff and between, obviously, the Big Ten wrestling tournament. So we'll see if that all works out. And then later this weekend, Penn State signee Marcus Blaze is in action at the Ohio State tournament. That runs Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think it's in Cleveland, but certainly somewhere in Ohio, obviously. And he is going to he's bumped up for the postseason to 150 pounds. That's not where he figures to project at the college level, but that was what his team needed after an injury to make sure they qualified as many wrestlers as possible to the state tournament. So far, so good for him in the postseason. He will now try and win his 4th state title at 150 pounds. So the plan, T. Frank, like I said earlier, we'll have some predictions for the Big Ten tournament at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com later this week. We will have preview and results of both the Pennsylvania and Ohio State wrestling tournaments. And anything else that pops up, we'll have that too over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
Yeah, and of course, we're off for the football show next week. But Greg, do you want to do a recap of everything next week? You want to come back and do this show next week?
That sounds good to me.
All right, we'll be back next Wednesday at 5 p.m. when this drops on YouTube and on the podcast. Until then, we'll talk to you later for the Penn State Wrestling Show.